Hello and welcome to the rough recollection of retro game activities I had for 2024. There's probably going to be a little bit of bleed over between 2023 and this most recent year for convenience and me having a terrible memory. So the first game that I have on the list is Voodoo Vents Remastered. This is a remake of an original Xbox game. I mostly played this on the Steam Deck. It was effectively a 3D platformer for the original Xbox. Relative to other contemporary 3D platformers, there was a lot of voice acting. I remember enjoying it, but I did eventually put it down at some point. It looks like the last time I played it was the 3rd of last January. At some point, I pre-ordered Shantae, Sega Revolution, the revived Game Boy Advance sequel to the original Shantae that was shelved for like 20 years until they just made the sequel on the DSi. I have nothing to say regarding what the game plays like because I don't think anyone outside of Wayforward has played the game. I also spent some time playing the Sonic Riders ROM hack, Sonic Riders Tournament Edition, and DX, which are basically ROM hacks designed to make the games more competitive and balanced, in addition to adding new characters. I believe at some point these were the same teams, but it sounds like there was some sort of drama that happened, and I am not familiar with that. But to play these, you basically need to patch a ROM that you have acquired yourself. I couldn't really tell you much more specific than that, other than I played vanilla Sonic Riders, and for a bit I played a little bit of Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, which kind of after being an elusive game for a while, I finally got around to playing it, and it felt a little disappointing compared to the first one. It felt a lot slower and clunkier. I can see the appeal, but it doesn't really feel like the Mario Kart competitor that the original Riders felt like. Though, as a related note, I did enjoy the Sonic Riders themed story arc in the Sonic IDW comics this year. And to follow that, one of the characters added into Sonic Riders Tournament Edition was Emerald from Sonic Battle, another game I believe I played this year. So Sonic Battle was basically a Game Boy Sonic the Hedgehog fighting game with RPG elements. Relatively speaking, the combat of the game is fairly simple, with every character having like a jab to heavy attack combo. You can also pull your heavy attack off immediately, having a jump, an aerial attack, some sort of aerial action. Additionally, there is a chase and a dunk attack, which is knocking your opponent across the arena, chasing after them, and then slamming them into the ground. Perhaps the most notable piece of complexity is how the special attacks work. Basically, mapped to the R button, the player has 3 types of attack to choose from. You have a powerful hit, you have a projectile, and you have a trip mine. And all 3 of these have a grounded and a aerial variant. And at the start of each stock, the player would choose one to be the grounded one to be aerial, and one to act as a guard. For the most part, it doesn't matter which one you choose to be guard, as they are all going to act about the same. And by holding down the guard button, the player puts down their shield and then begins regaining health. This can also be used to fill the one-hit KO meter that will also fill on its own over time. And basically, once this one-hit KO meter is filled, the player begins flashing, and the next special attack they do will be a one-hit KO, assuming it makes contact and is not blocked, which is where that guard ability comes into play. And the way I believe this works is that the player is granted immunity to the type of special move they choose as their guard. So, for example, if the player has chosen the projectile to be their guard move, obviously they can't use the projectile to attack, but they are immune to being hit by projectile attacks, which I believe extends to the one-hit KOs. So I also mentioned this game has RPG elements, and that is primarily through Emerald, the robot that Shadow fights at the beginning of the Sonic X Shadow Dark Beginnings thing that they did. Basically, Emerald is able to look at skills and then replicate them, meaning Emerald can copy and then use any and all the skills of the other characters in the game. And there's only really 2 limitations to this, is that Emerald only learns 1 skill at random from each combatant in battle, the other one being the game's leveling mechanic. Each skill requires a multiple of 5 skill points to be equipped. This is where my major point of contention for the game's balancing begins. As expected of something that is kind of supposed to be an RPG, it is a bit grindy. So, skill points are awarded dependent on the player's performance in a battle. The player receives 1 skill point for victory, 2 for not losing a stock, and I believe 5 for not taking any damage. 6 are granted for winning an optional battle with 2 Phis without taking any damage, and 10 for getting a Chaos Emerald. Phi is basically a color palette swap of Emerald that uses the moveset of another character. I do not believe skills can be captured from Phi, and Chaos Emeralds are earned at the end of each story. And considering that general starts the game as basically just a worse version of Sonic with all of his stats set as low as possible. Earning skill points early on is extremely difficult. This is somewhat mitigated by the fact that basically every battle is actually done twice with like a 5-point round and then a 10-point round, so you can at least get 2 points out of it. Though I think just letting the player earn some skill points through even a loss would have been super helpful. And the way the story structure of the game works is basically you spend about half of any story playing either as that story's main character or as Emerald. So basically each character's story is more of an attempt to get more skills from that particular character. Though there is something weird I remember about either the player not being able to earn skill points or capture skills if they play as the story's character rather than Emerald for that particular match. Though I believe it's only one or the other. Overall, I remember liking Sonic Battle, even if it has like some glaring issues with it. Anyways, getting away from this Game Boy Advance Sonic games, another game I played was a crapload of Sonic Adventure 2. As you might have noticed, I made a video about City Escape, where I obviously had to play a bunch of City Escape, but I also basically did a full run of Sonic Adventure 2 in about February. I didn't do like all the emblems, but I did the story mode and I actually bothered to do the Chow content, and I did that using the Chow World Extended mod. While I did eventually get a perfect Chow, I do believe for like the vanilla races, you don't need an all S rank Chow for anything, but I could be wrong. Anyway, if I remember to do it, here's band for band. The perfect Chow. I might have also done a full run of Sonic Adventure 1. I don't remember if that was this year or not. I know I did a run of the first one on Steam Deck when I went on vacation in 2023 though. I think jumping back to like March or whenever this came out, I did play the Paper Mario Thousand Year Door remake. I have the original one on GameCube. I think the last time I played the original to a super significant degree was like summer 2019 when I found it at a retro game store. Aside from the Switch version adding some quality of life changes and post-game content, for the most part, these are about the same game, with the most notable differences being that the GameCube version runs at 60 frames a second, as to where the Switch runs at 30. So while button timing is important, this was taken into account, so I never felt like it was a problem. I'd arguably say it's even more forgiving, with the exception of Goombella's Multi-Bonk, where I believe it was updated to be less forgiving specifically. That being a slight visual restylization, which is best described as the overworld having a little bit more detail and characters being noticeably more papery because each part of them is given a tiny bit of thickness, making the layers that make up the character more apparent. The best way to summarize this, which as cliche as it is, it really does just kind of look like what you remember the game looking like. The last notable difference is that the game was relocalized, bringing it more in line with the original Japanese script. This includes reverting Hooktail's weakness from crickets back to frogs, reverting Tech's glowing eye camera thing from blue to red, making the reference to 2001 A Space Odyssey more apparent, and reintegrating Vivian being trans. I liked how it added a little bit more depth to Vivian's character and explained her motivations. I'm gonna say that the Paper Mario Thousand Year Door remake kind of falls where I put the 3D HD Zelda remakes. If you have the original, you don't necessarily need the remake, and if you have the remake, you don't necessarily need the original. It's neat to have the different versions. The newer version has the benefit of X number of years of foresight and retrospect going on, but at the end of the day, you like the base game or you don't. As a quick aside, I did not finish the Super Mario RPG remake. I had started the Super Nintendo version on the SNES Classic, but I didn't get very far in it. My general understanding is that for the most part they're about as good, but the Switch version is a little bit easier due to some quality of life changes that they added. And while I am on the topic of Mario RPGs, with button timing as a central mechanic, I'm going to talk about Mario and Luigi Paper Jam. So in terms of my console collection, I managed to acquire like 2 2DSs in Xbox and a small new 3DS throughout this year somehow for all like stupid cheap or free. I have nothing to say about the Xbox other than I plan on modding it. But as part of my new 3DS thing, I've been 3D printing a crap load of faceplates for that, and I finished Mario and Luigi Paper Jam on it. So I hacked my 3DSs, basically moved the game over to the small 3DS and my save file, and then just kind of completed it from there. I had like entirely forgotten about the copy mechanic for Paper Mario in that game, and my general summary of the game is that as a Mario and Luigi and Paper Mario crossover, it's not a good job of being a crossover between those games, but it's still a solid Mario and Luigi game. Played like a little bit of the Superstar Saga remake too, but I didn't get much further than I already was. Other than that, notable games I played on the 3DS was Kid Icarus Uprising, reminding me that, yeah, that's still basically my favorite 3DS game. I played a little bit of Rayman 3D, which is basically just Rayman 2, and then I started Pokemon Crystal Legacy on it, and then I didn't do much more than that, and I will go over Crystal Legacy a little bit later. So going back to relatively new consoles that can play old games, for a while I was playing Rare Replay. That was mostly Conker's Bad Fur Day and Banjo-Tooie. There was some Banjo-Kazooie in there, but basically Tooie and Conker. Conker is basically just emulated in Rare Replay, much like Jet Force Gemini, I think, which I booted up, played 10 seconds, and then quit. As opposed to the Banjo games, which are running their Xbox 360 ports, which I believe the consensus is the 360 versions are better than the N64 ones, but the N64 ones are available on Nintendo Switch Online. I don't remember if I played them there or not, but I generally had a good time with the Rare 3D platform. I managed to get to like the second main area in Banjo-Tooie. After owning that game since like 2010, I got to like the point where you can see like the zombified Jinjos, and I had no idea how to leave after that. But somehow I figured it out, so that's cool. I think I got like a third of the way through Conker. I don't remember where I am. Out of order chronologically, I picked up Sonic Adventure 2 and the Dreamcast collection for the Xbox, mostly because I'm like, well, I already own the other 3 significant versions of Sonic Adventure 2. I might as well round it out on Xbox and toss in Adventure 1 just for the sake of having it on a disc. Speaking of retro game collections on the Xbox, I like how I just mentioned Rare Replay. When I bought Rare Replay, I got it for like $7, and that included 007, which I played for like an hour and then quit. And an interesting thing is that the physical copies of Rare Replay and the Dreamcast collection do not have all of their content playable on the current Xbox systems. So apparently with Rare Replay, you only get 007 if you own it digitally. Luckily, it does go on sale pretty often for pretty cheap, but it's kind of stupid that 007 is not just included. And for the Dreamcast collection of the 4 games being Crazy Taxi, Sonic Adventure, Sega Bass Fishing, and Space Channel 5 Part 2. Space Channel 5 is not playable on the Dreamcast collection on the current Xbox systems. During the summer, I was playing a decent chunk of Mario Superstar Baseball for Nintendo GameCube because my brother was in town. So we played Mario Baseball and he beat my ass. Additionally, I did get some use out of older consoles, so I hacked my Wii U and I played, I think, 1 round of Splatoon 1 and Mario Kart 8 Original, and then they put the servers down and I didn't figure out how to get Pretendo running, so I have to do that at some point. I think I played a little of the original Sonic Rush. I have been listening to the soundtrack a lot though. I did get my Nintendo 64 back up and running. I got an expansion pack for it. I got a couple of old controllers that I bought the new joystick sets for and got them up and running. In case you are curious, the Kish Bench ones I believe are the best parts I've used so far. Those are basically OEM but like produced a little bit cheaper, so you do have to sand them down a tiny bit. Intech makes a Hall Effect stick that is like the original style stick for the 64, which I don't get why this exists, other than the marketing buzzword of being able to say it is Hall Effect. For those that don't know, the Nintendo 64 effectively uses optical sensors, and those sensors are not what goes bad on your Nintendo 64 stick. What causes 64 sticks to go bad is the fact that basically these things were not lubed in the factory, so you just have plastic grinding against plastic till it disintegrates itself, and it's no longer able to keep the pressure required for these sticks to be snappy. I'm also going to give a quick review of the 64 controllers I've used. So I have 3 OEM. One is using a full Kish Bench replacement set. Those are basically brand new original manufacturer parts, though the post-production cleanup is not exactly as good, so you do have to do that yourself. You're basically sanding off extra little like nubbins from the injection molding process. I think when I bought it, it was pre-lubed, but I lubed it up again. That might have messed it up initially, but once I cleaned the wheels, it was fine. The Intech stick worked out of the box. I felt the spring could have been a little bit, springier. I replaced that with an OEM spring. It was fine. It works, I think, about as good as a new stick would have, which is the same I have for Kish Bench, except for the Intech Hall Effect stick sounds like shit. It just sounds super hollow and cheap. It works, and considering it's the same price, you might as well get something else, but this is pre-assembled, I guess, even though you want to open it up to relube it. And then I had a third one that was the original stick in good condition that I cleaned up and greased. I think it and the Kish Bench feel about the same, except the Kish Bench is going to feel a little bit nicer because it is not already worn down. But regarding 64 games, I played a little bit of Battletech thanks, since a friend of mine bought that and wanted to check it out since he knew I had a Nintendo 64. And then I got a Summer Cart 64 flash cart, which can do the 64 disk drive emulation. So at some point I need to figure that out to check it out, but it has been fun using that to play ROM hack. Most notably Sonic and Super Mario 64 and Smash Remix, which is basically Smash Brothers, but with more characters. I also pre-ordered the Analog 3D, so I will give a review. It is basically a hardware clone of a Nintendo 64 that uses the same technology that the Analog Pocket uses to play retro games without emulating them. The short and long of the technology is that there is a chip inside that can reconfigure itself to basically be the original chips that were in these older consoles. So you are replicating the hardware on a physical level as opposed to a purely software level. And speaking of hardware clones, I picked up a Mod Retro Chromatic, which is basically a Game Boy Color hardware clone. Its most notable features being it has a metal shell, its screen is a 1-to-1 with that of a original Game Boy Color, so it doesn't need to run any fancy filters. It has a built-in capture device, so it appears to your computer as a webcam for capturing your gameplay. At some point an update is supposed to enable it to capture sound over USB-C, but for now you need to use an aux cable, which kind of sounds like crap because there's a lot of interference. But it does have other niceties, such as having a backlit screen and a significantly louder speaker. I can't speak for how an Analog Pocket feels, but I want to say it's aiming to be a more premium feeling system, and I think the other big difference is the fact that the infrared port is on the top of this as opposed to the bottom of the Analog Pocket. A super basic breakdown of the differences between the two is that basically for like 20 bucks more, you get Game Boy Advance support out of the Analog Pocket off the bat. You can expand that to doing more games if you buy the adapters, or you can mod it, I guess. The Pocket can display to a TV, but you need their $100 dock, which is sold separately. And if you want to capture that, you need a capture device, which I don't think they sell. As a note, the Chromatic is going to get a rechargeable battery pack that can be charged with a USB-C cable through the integrated port. However, that has not been released yet, so who knows when that's happening. The Chromatic does overall feel very nice and sturdy and premium. It runs off 3 AA's, which is kind of lame, but again, they are making a rechargeable battery pack, or you can just use 3 rechargeable AA's. Note, both of these devices are less energy efficient relative to an original Game Boy Color by nature of the technology they use and the fact that they do have backlit screens in them. If you do use rechargeable AA's in a Chromatic, I would recommend using at least 3000 milliamp hours. I have some that are closer to 2000. When those are all charged, they only read as being half full on the battery life meter. Also, the Chromatic has a sapphire glass screen lens, so that's nice too. The Chromatic also includes its own special version of Tetris, which is exclusive, I think, to buying the first edition of it, which at this point I think you have to get them from GameStop. And the other big draw of the Chromatic is the fact that the company that made it, Mod Retro, is publishing new games for the Chromatic. You can either buy these through their website or at GameStop. And to note, as I mentioned earlier, because the Chromatic is just a hardware clone of the Game Boy Color, all of the games made for it can either be played on an original Game Boy or a Game Boy Color depending on the game. So you don't necessarily need a Chromatic to play any of these games. So aside from Chromatic Tetris, I did pick up Dragon M for the Chromatic. I basically played 10 minutes and put it down because I was distracted. As a side note, the Chromatic games that do save, I believe use FRAM, which basically means you don't need a battery for the game to save, so you don't have to worry about your save dying on you in 10 years. So what had distracted me from playing the new game for the new not hardware I had was, at the time, I was playing Pokemon Yellow Legacy on my Game Boy Color. So before I got the Chromatic, I was using a modded Game Boy Color, which had a 3D printed front shell, laminated IPS screen, and wireless/USB-C rechargeable battery. So how did I get Yellow Legacy onto my Game Boy Color? I purchased the MBC 3000 V4, I believe, from Ben Vin, who basically makes stuff for retro consoles. And at the end of the day, what this cartridge is, it is a dual single ROM cartridge with real-time clock support for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. So basically, the features of this cart are it is a single dual ROM cartridge, meaning you can load 2 ROMs onto it, and you swap between them by moving a dip switch on the cartridge, which the shell it comes with does not support getting to the dip switch, so you have to basically get another shell to put the cartridge in, or I don't know, cut a hole in it. There's a switch that does something that swaps between 2 modes I don't understand, and one that turns the clock on and off. So So the other big draw, aside from the fact they say this is compatible with Pokemon Stadium, is that you don't need to patch your games to save to this cartridge. So normally, back in the day, Game Boy and Game Boy Color games would use a battery inside the cartridge to like keep a constant 3 volts to an SRAM chip, which is where your save was stored. You don't need to do this, so while there is a battery in this cartridge, all it does is manage the clock. I believe it is the same like size of battery that the Easy Flash Omega uses, which I hear people complain about because it's pretty small and dies after like a year or two, but unlike the Easy Flash, this battery is not soldered in, so you simply pop open the shell, slide the battery out, slide a new one in, you're good to go. I guess you have to reset the clock, but that's minor at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, I'm probably getting a similar battery holder for my older Pokemon games and my Easy Flash Omega, so it's easier to swap the batteries in and out of these things, even at the risk of them being a little less secure. Anyways, so I dumped Pokemon Yellow Legacy to the cartridge and I played it. It probably took me like a good 2, maybe 2.5 months to finish this. But Yellow Legacy is a ROM hack by The Smith Plays, which aims to rebalance the Generation 1 Pokemon games, more specifically Yellow, and you're able to catch all of the Pokemon in the game, in addition to general quality of life changes. So there's general rebalancing, Pokemon that needed to be traded to evolve, will evolve at a certain level. Interestingly, you can still trade Pokemon with unmodded versions of at least Red and Blue. I have not tried with Yellow Original yet. Some of the other quality of life changes include, just a bigger bag space, things being a little less buggy, being able to use HMs from the overworld without needing to go into the party menu to select it, buffing your Pikachu, and letting Pikachu learn all of the HMs. Overall, I really enjoyed this run of Pokemon Yellow. I think it was balanced decently well. I think the issues I ran into were more a matter of me not picking a good team that dealt with all of the stuff I would run into and encounter, but I overall enjoyed this thing still. I do distinctly remember editing my save a couple of times just to boost my Pokemon's levels so I wouldn't need to grind, because I felt that was a little stupid to have to do at this point. Though I think anytime I needed to grind, for the most part, it was a me problem because I simply avoided too many battles as I am off to do. And Pokemon Yellow Legacy is basically the prequel to Pokemon Crystal Legacy, something that I'm working on right now, which has a similar goal, basically rebalancing Crystal, making things more viable, adding quality of life. I think I've only boosted my levels like once so far, where I didn't want to grind for more hours, so I just boosted everyone to 28. To be able to take on Chuck, though, it still wasn't like a super easy battle or anything like that. This is also a different run of Crystal Legacy than the one I started in 2024, but what I realized I liked about having a single ROM flashcard is the fact that you are really forced to pick something and then stick with it, which is something that when you can load every game you want on something, you actually have nothing that you can play because you play something for 2 seconds, get mad, and then don't want to play it anymore. So it's kind of nice for being focused. So that has basically made me go out and buy a bunch of bootleg cartridges to take and then write ROM hacks to. I think my end goal might be to just play the ROM hack on the flashcard and then, get a hold of some bootlegs, rewrite them, reshell and sticker them just to kind of match, and then I guess keep the save on there until they die and back them up or whatever somewhere else. I don't know. So depending on if I'm burned out or not on Pokemon, I guess I'll be doing that with Emerald Legacy. And while this isn't really an old Pokemon game at this point, this kind of like kick was spurred off by the collection challenge they added to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, where if you complete the Scarlet and Violet decks in Pokemon Home, you get a shiny Meloetta. So I did that, and I kind of remembered that I actually really like just catching Pokemon, because normally when I go back and play the games again, I tend not to catch stuff because it's kind of like, well, what's the point? So I think in the future, I have to like give myself a goal of catching X percentage of the Pokemon in the game. And, fittingly enough, when I started recording this, they basically announced that they are adding a similar, complete the dex reward to Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, and Legends Arceus to get a shiny Enamorus and Manaphy, which is kind of nice to see. Okay, so I think I'm near the end of my old console bullcrap, and I think the end of this list. The other final thing I did is that I got some stuff for my Dreamcast. So I ordered a game called Stormwind, which I think initially released in 2012, but it got a physical release for Dreamcast this year. I got the special edition, which is like one of 500. The only real difference between that and the standard is for like 20 bucks more, I get a bigger box, and I get a shell for a VMU. So I bought a VMU for my Dreamcast. I had 2 more, but I need to do whatever. And I've printed the parts to make these AAA battery adapters so that I can power them with AAA batteries as opposed to 2 watch batteries. Because in case you did not know, the Sega Dreamcast had special memory cards, which were a micro game console that you could play games on. And while it didn't use batteries to retain the save or anything, they retained the console's ability, or the memory card's ability, to be like powered on while just like when you're doing whatever with the thing. So like that's how you could play your mini games, but they freaking ate batteries like none other. So I have 3D printed these. I put one together and got it to work until I broke it putting it on the thing. So I have to do this again. And I have they're basically just waiting for me to put them together, but I need to freaking do it, and I don't want to do it because I have to solder again. So I played that game for like an hour and I sucked at it, and I really just bought it because I thought it was interesting more than anything. Okay, yes. And then I picked up Fur Fighters for the Dreamcast because I had the demo of it on, I think, the Dream Generator Volume 2, and I was like, oh, they have this here. Why don't I get it? I liked what I played. I was just also really bad at it, and it was kind of jank because this is, you know, like it's a Dreamcast era first-person shooter, so we haven't figured out dual analog yet. And the Dreamcast has 1 analog, so you aim with analog and you walk with the D-pad. Or by D-pad, I mean you walk with the base buttons, which like works given the technology, but it is weird, and I think you can just get the same game on PlayStation with like more content, so you should probably just play that one. And then I think at the end of my crap, I'm including stuff I bought this year. I picked up a copy of Ninja Breadman because it was $5, and I remembered that was like the worst game ever made for the Wii, according to some people. So now I have it. And then these are also not this year, but I'm considering them because I ordered them this year. We're not that far in, and they're for the 3DS. I got I got Cubic Ninja, which is really significant for basically being like the starting point of 3DS hacking, because initially what happened, basically there's a QR code you could use with the game to scan data into your game, and people figured out how that worked, and they used that as the entry point for early 3DS hacking. So for a while, this game was like stupid expensive because as soon as Nintendo knew what was going on, they just removed the thing from basically all storefronts and recalled it and whatever. But now, you know, you don't need it anymore, so it's like $20. And then I finally got myself a copy of Cave Story 3D. It was a game I had wanted for a long time. I had Cave Story on the 3DS. I had the download version. I think I could have bought it like on 2 occasions, but then I didn't. I think I paid like $15 more to get the nice little like slip cover on it, so it wasn't that much. It was expensive. I basically paid more than a new game for it, but grand scheme, I expected it to run for a bit more relative to like how old the game is, the fact that it wasn't available on the eShop, and all this other jazz. I don't think Cave Story 3D is even necessarily that good of a version of Cave Story. What I have heard is it's like a definitive edition, but it's not a definitive edition. It's kind of just like I did everything I wanted to with this, and it's just like an interesting piece of Cave Story. So right now, I think technically the best version is the Switch one because that has got like some mildly updated graphics. You have the old graphics in there too. It adds co-op and maybe like a super tiny amount of like new data. And the 3DS version doesn't really have anything other than just being an oddity. It's just interesting. And I think the last game I can mention is I bought the 2022 re-release of Avenging Spirit, which is apparently basically the exact same as the original localization, except because they didn't have to worry about storage limitations, the end screens that were removed to fit the English text were re-added back, telling you how to access the like bonus mode. And it came on a cool transparent glow-in-the-dark cartridge with the main character sprite silk screened on the back of it. So yeah, it doesn't save or anything. I think that's it. That's my adventures with old video games.